Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Beyond the Cage. I'm your host, Jim Graham, and joining me today on the line, we have a special guest. He will be fighting Volkan Ozdemir on the main card of UFC 214 this Saturday from Anaheim, California. He is the poster boy, Jimmy Manuwa. And Jimmy, thanks for joining me here on Beyond the Cage.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Doing all right here as you're getting ready for your fight here at UFC 214. And looking at your last performance, Jimmy, a lot of people kind of had you a little bit of an underdog there, taking on a very strong wrestler in Corey Anderson, but you were able to dispatch him very early, 3 minutes there into the first round. Did you have a feeling that if you could lay your hands on him, that you would be able to put him away like that?
I've that feeling about everybody. You know, I think whoever I catch clean, catch with a good punch, then they're going to go down.
Now, of course, in your matchup coming up here on Saturday, you're taking on Volkan Ozdemir, who's out of Switzerland. He's kind of came out of nowhere. He made his debut earlier this year on short notice, was able to beat OSP, and then had a huge upset against Misha Cirkunov back at UFC Fight Night 109. From what you've seen of Ozdemir, what do you think of his game?
He's a good fighter. He's a good striker. Comes from a striking background, so it's looking like it's going to be an exciting fight for me as usual. You know, I'm known for putting on the most exciting fights. And I think I've got a 94% knockout record. That's I think one of the highest in. I'd have to check how high that is on the charts in the UFC. But everyone knows my fights are exciting and everything, and I just look forward to it.
Now, of course, after you went over Corey Anderson, there were a lot of different matchups that you could have been set for heading into this summer. And, you know, with Ozdemir's quick win over Cirkunov, myself personally, I thought, man, if he wants a quick turnaround, him against Jimmy Manuwa would be a heck of a fight. And a few days after he had beat Misha, the UFC announces that you're taking on Ozdemir. Was that a fight that you were offered, or was that something you asked for? And, take us a little bit through how that fight developed so quickly for you.
Well, I was scheduled to fight Cormier, but then Jones came back into the picture, so I couldn't really argue with that. So they wanted to put me on the same card in case someone didn't make it to the main event. And Ozdemir asked me after his fight, so they made it happen. So, here we are.
Now, of course, your fight is a top 5 matchup here in the light heavyweight division. If you're able to get by Ozdemir, that not only gives you a win inside the top 5, that now gives you 3 straight victories in the UFC. Do you think that, like you said, you were scheduled to fight Cormier, so does that put you right back into the title picture by taking out someone like Ozdemir?
Yeah, 100%. I think that gives me my path to the title shot once again. And that's it, man. I just got to do a job on this Swiss geezer, and then that's it. We're ready to go for the title. But I respect Ozdemir, and I respect everyone who gets in the cage, and I'm fully focused on the task ahead of me, and I look forward to the challenge on Saturday.
Now, so far, like you said, this is probably going to be a fun fight between you two, and I think it's going to be as well with your high knockout rate. And he has 10 knockouts of his own of 14 victories. Is that where you see this fight playing out, Jimmy? Is pretty much on the feet, or do you think that there's any chance that he tries to take you down to avoid your power shots?
It's not going to end any other way than a knockout. You can bet the bank on that. It's not going to end any other way than a knockout. To me, the only way to win a fight is by knockout. So, I don't like decisions. I hate decisions. And I've got one submission on my record. So that's it. It's going to end by knockout.
Now, of course, speaking of the main event, it's now Jon Jones. He's re-entered the fold after his suspension from last year when Cormier and Jones were supposed to fight again at UFC 200, now happening at UFC 214. Obviously, you're very interested in that matchup. How do you think this fight is going to play out the second time around between those two?
I think Jones win. I think it plays out probably the same way it did before. Jones might get a finish, but he's going to win on points. And I can't see. I don't think he'll submit DC, but I think he'll either stop him or win on decision.
Now, of course, I know you're good friends with Alexander Gustafsson. You've done some training with him as well. I know he's involved in this title picture as well at light heavyweight after his win over Glover Teixeira. Do you think there's, I know you've said that you might not fight him, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but if that fight does get presented at any time, is that the case that you would step aside and let Alexander either take a shot or to have his run at champion?
No, everyone knows that we've said it 100 times now. We're not going to fight each other. We're not interested in fighting each other. We're interested in helping each other to grow and getting better. So that's more important to us than a title shot. And whoever gets a shot first, I know that I've got big fights coming my way anyway. So it doesn't really matter who gets the title shot. Obviously, I want a title shot as well, but it's what it is.
Now, I want to bring this up because I think it is a possibility for you. Of course, earlier this year, England guy, much like yourself and Anthony Joshua for the heavyweight boxing championship, had that huge fight there against Klitschko for the heavyweight championship, 90,000 people in Wembley. Do you envision something like that for you, fighting for a possible UFC championship and a huge crowd like that there in England?
Yeah, how big would that be? That'd be massive. Imagine I beat Ozdemir this Saturday and they schedule Wembley Arena for the title fight. How crazy would that be? That'd be brilliant.
Now, of course, when you look at yourself against these top two guys, Daniel Cormier and Jimmy Manuwa, or you, Jimmy Manuwa, how do you think you stack up against those two top guys fighting on Saturday, and Daniel Cormier and John Jones?
Hey, I'm up there with these guys. I believe I train with the best in the world. We've got such a great team and everything, and we're ready for all of these fighters in the world. We've got so many variety of bodies coming, a top class, high class body, and we're ready for these guys. It's no problem.
All right, he is the poster boy, Jimmy Manuwa. You can follow him on Twitter at posterboyjm. And Jimmy, thanks again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I look forward to your fight against Ozdemir this Saturday at UFC 214.
Thanks very much, guys. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to putting Ozdemir to sleep this weekend.
Once again, he is Jimmy Manuwa, the poster boy, and you heard him right here on Beyond the Cage.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Beyond the Cage. I'm your host, Jim Graham, and thank you for those of you who are joining me live on the MMA Fighting Club Facebook page. And for those of you watching after the fact on YouTube, my YouTube channel here, youtube.com/BeyondTheCagePodcast. Again, you just heard Jimmy Manuwa. He just spoke about his fight here at UFC 214 this Saturday against Volkan Ozdemir. And again, for those of you watching live, that interview I did with Jimmy Manuwa is actually pinned to the top of the MMA Fighting Club Facebook page, so you can go there and listen to it. It's about 10 minutes chatting with the top 5 light heavyweight in the world, the poster boy, Jimmy Manuwa. Very excited for his fight and the others on the pay-per-view main card for UFC 214. I'm going to get to breaking those fights down and actually picking those 5 main card fights here a little later in the show. I'm going to start first with last weekend's UFC action from Long Island in New York, UFC on Fox 25. Now, I know a lot of people are obsessing about the TV ratings, that it was the lowest overnight ratings in UFC on Fox history, and a lot of people are maybe shocked by that, but honestly, I'm not. Realistically, if you look at this card, it has a lot of nice names. It has a lot of names, obviously, from the New York, New Jersey area. I'm sure the Live Gate did very well there at Nassau Coliseum. But the thing is, Weidman, to me, is not that big of a draw. Yeah, he's the former champion. Yes, he beat Anderson Silva twice. But I don't think he's a huge fan favorite. Obviously, the fans in New York love him again. That Live Gate, I'm sure, was awesome. Then you look at his counterpart, Kelvin Gastelum. This guy has had weight issues and has never really had a signature win, really. If you really look at it, I mean, okay, he beat a washed-up Johnny Hendricks. He beat a guy coming off a 2-year layoff in Tim Kennedy, and he beat the shell of Vitor Belfort. You know, where's his signature win? I'm not saying those are all bad wins, but I'm just saying he hasn't beat anyone of real merit. I mean, the best win of his career is probably over Rick Story. Now, sure, he probably should have won that fight against Tyron Woodley, but at the end of the day, he didn't. So he's not, I wouldn't say, a huge draw either. Now, both are very good fighters and is deserving of a main event. But if you look at the other fights coupled with that, it is the summer as well. It wasn't that huge of an event, to be honest. I mean, compared to other UFC on Fox cards, this one really doesn't stack up to a lot of those. So it doesn't surprise me that much that this card did bad in the TV ratings. And obviously, I'm a guy who covers UFC. I do it each and every week, doing a podcast, breaking down UFC and other MMA organizations. And I didn't even know until the actual week of the fight that this was a Fox broadcast card, not a FS1 card. So if I didn't know that, how would the casual fan know that? So I'm not surprised about the TV ratings, and that's kind of what I'll say about that. Now, before I get to, I'm going to specifically break down those 4 main card fights. I will talk a little bit about the undercard. Overall, I thought this was a very solid card in terms of quality of fights. Chris Wade was able to pick up a victory over Frankie Perez, and a kid I'm very high on in Shane Burgos took another step forward. He took out the very dangerous Goffredo Pepe, and I know, Pepe maybe he's not better than his last opponent, that being Shane Burgos and Charles Rosa, but he's a dangerous guy. He throws wild, he is lengthy, he's a long featherweight, and does have some serious submission skills. So he is a tricky guy, and Burgos was able to go in there with some good boxing, didn't really get tempted to try to prove himself on the ground against a great submission guy in Godfredo, and really put it to him. I know he didn't get the finish, but this is a very solid performance as he continues to roll on here in the UFC's featherweight division. I believe he's relatively a young guy. I want to say he's 25, 26. I'm going to double check that here. He was born in 1991. So I think he would be 26 years old. He's now 3-0 in the UFC. Won his first, and this is in a relatively short time span. I mean, he made his debut in December of last year, beating Diego Trotar. Then he knocks out Charles Rosa in the 3rd round back in April, and now has the decision victory over Pepe. And very big for the weight class, 5'11", 75-inch reach. That's a huge featherweight. He's 10-0. He's definitely going to be a force to be reckoned with. I definitely see a bright future for Mr. Burgos, and I'm definitely on his bandwagon right now. There's no doubt about that. I really look forward to him later this year. Probably, with that 3-0 and beating 2 solid fighters in a row, like I said, Charles Rosa and Goffredo Pepe, I expect a jump up in competition for his next fight, probably sometime this fall if he keeps up that pace of fighting every 3-4 months. Also, Junior Albini making his UFC debut, comes out of nowhere, knocking out Tim Johnson, the very solid veteran and top 15 heavyweight. I don't think too many people expected that. Johnson's not a guy who I don't know in his career, but in his UFC tenure, had never been finished in 5 UFC fights with a UFC record of 3-2. His last victory, probably his best one over Daniel Omolchuk, but boy, Junior Albini, that's a huge win for him. It's hard to say because it's heavyweight. A lot of those, the one punch things can happen. So I don't know if like, oh yeah, this kid shows a bright future. He knocked out Tim Johnson, but it is impressive. No one definitely expected that, and huge win for him. And then Marlon Vera, another good victory for him. He had that really good finish of Brad Pickett in his last fight, and really for him, it's getting the weight cut down and making sure he has enough gas left in the tank, because he is a big bantamweight at 5'8", and if he can get that down, he's a dangerous guy. He's now won 3 fights in a row. Brad Pickett obviously being the signature victory, knocking out the Brit in his last fight there in the 3rd round. Brian Keller, you could maybe say, is a little step down, but if anyone thought it was a fluke against Brad Pickett, I don't think so. And he's fought some tough guys. He also has a win over Roman Salazar. He's also fought Davey Brand and Marco Beltran. So this is a guy who's taken on some solid competition in his 6 UFC fights now overall, with a record of 4-2, 10-3-1 in his career. I think I think that's really the only thing is holding him back is the conditioning and maybe the ability to stop the takedown. I think those are probably going to be the 2 things that he's going to have to work on to really get to that next level. But much like Shane Burgos, 3 wins in a row, probably expect to jump up in competition for him moving forward. Jeremy Kennedy beat Kyle Bochniak. I'm not going to go over that one too much. Kennedy pretty much controlled him. I didn't really see him go for a finish too much. He was really just working for position. Kind of a boring fight. I know Kennedy remains undefeated, and he did what he had to do to get the win against the guy in Kyle Bochniak, who I think is a dangerous individual. But when you look at a prospect like Kennedy as opposed to a guy like Shane Burgos, same division, the featherweight, you got to be a lot more excited if you're the UFC. If you're you got to be a lot more excited if you're the UFC to see a guy like Shane Burgos in there as of right now as Jeremy Kennedy. And as a fan, you have to be more excited by Shane Burgos. He's earned that. And for Jeremy Kennedy, it's great to control with wrestling. I'm not saying it isn't. But he's going to have to add in more active submission offense or more active striking offense from the top. He can't just simply work for position, because he's not going to do himself any favors with the UFC. That's not what they want to see. And it's not going to do him a lot of favors in his career, because the longer you let guys hang around, even though you're dominating, that prolongs the chance of them landing that one punch or doing that one scramble that gets them into a position, because you're not hurting them. You're just kind of wearing them down and maybe frustrating them. And that forces some desperation. And sometimes when guys get desperate, they do things they wouldn't normally do, and that's when you get caught. You got to be able to have that threat of putting people away, make people fear a little bit, to know that, if I go to the ground with this guy, not only can he hold me there, he can hurt me here and end the fight here. I got to get up. And that's the only thing I can see him working on. He's still a young guy, and I'm not saying he's going to be garbage for the rest of his career. He's just going to be a boring wrestler. But that is one thing I'd like to see him improve upon his game, is being offensive with those great positions that he's been able to get so far in his career. Chase Sherman against Damian Grabowski. What you saw in this fight was a guy who is an athletic heavyweight who's really changing and throwing a variety of different strikes, a lot of punches and bunches, which you don't typically see from a heavyweight, against the guy who's just plodding forward, throwing an overhand. I think you saw a very big contrast in style. You saw kind of what's maybe a new guard of heavyweight division against an old guard. Old guard being Grabowski, new guard being Chase Sherman. And yeah, Sherman took some shots. He's going to have to shore up that defense a little bit, either getting the hands up or circling a little more, because the way Sherman was dominating with the striking, that overhand shouldn't have landed as much as it did, and it did. And he was able to take that and knock it out. And that's something, to take big shots like that and still going. But against guys who are more credible heavyweights, that's not a sound strategy. You're probably going to go down. I mean, if you face someone like an Alistair Overeem and you take 10 overhand rights, you ain't standing and being able to last that. Or Stipe Miocic or Junior Dos Santos, those guys, you're not going to be able to take that many big bombs from them. So while, yes, it was a good performance, a lot better than his last fight, he still took a couple mini overhands than he probably would have liked, and I would have liked, as a guy who is, again, starting to jump on his bandwagon. So overall, a good performance by Chase Sherman, but that's what he'll have to shore up moving forward in his career. And doing some training now with Jackson's, in addition to Alan Belcher down in his native Mississippi, I think is going to be a huge, excellent. Alan Belcher is a great striking coach. You add in, Winklejohn and Jackson's tutelage as well. He definitely is a guy that I will move on the rise. And for a division that is made up of guys 35 plus, having a dude under 30 is a rarity. So Chase Sherman is the guy that is definitely him and Walt Harris, who have already matched up, I think, are definitely two of the future stars in this heavyweight division. Alex Oliveira against Ryan LaFleur. This was an excellent performance by Alex Oliveira. Obviously, the key for him was to stop the takedown, and if he could, he definitely was going to be the better striker of the two. And the question is, could he hold off long enough, and would he be able to kind of unleash himself? Because even though you stop the takedown, a lot of guys are still tentative when they know they're the better striker, knowing that takedown could come any moment. But boy, Alex Oliveira, he was able to impress. I mean, Ryan LaFleur's a pretty big welterweight, obviously a guy that has a lot of good wrestling skills, and Alex Oliveira was able to dispatch that. And this is, I think, you couple this with his win over Tim Means a few months ago. Alex Oliveira is definitely a force to be reckoned with. He's not just simply a lightweight, moving up. This guy is a legitimate welterweight who has good skills and proves that, he can stop fights too. I mean, he stopped. LaFleur tried 2 takedowns, 1 in each round, stuffed him both times, and then was able to uncork that sneaky uppercut, which in real time, because of the camera angle, you can't really see. You kind of just see that obviously something hit him because LaFleur goes down, but it isn't until they show that overhead camera angle that you see that uppercut snuck in. And boy, he's definitely a guy to watch. I know he still has some things to work on. Obviously, a lot of people didn't like how he acted in the Will Brooks fight, but boy, this guy at 170, definitely it just fits him a heck of a lot better. He has some power. He has some height and reach in that division. Obviously, he's going to have a lot more energy. And if he proves that, you can't take him down, that's a huge feather in his cap, because standing, I think he can make it a 50-50 fight with just about anybody in this division if it stays standing. And he has some serious power. And I think he's definitely a future star in this division. That's for sure. I do think that. Let's get to the main card fights here. UFC Long Island. I skipped over 2 fights. Eric Anders had a incredible debut and performance against Rafael Natal. Speaking of upsets, did not see that coming. Anders took this on short notice. A guy that was a former linebacker at the University of Alabama and just a few years ago transitioned to MMA. Wow. Talk about potential and wow factor on a debut. I mean, this was something, and if he can put it all together, I mean, he already has a lot of guys beat in terms of athleticism, and you add in already kind of having a semi-professional, career. I mean, college football is, like the minor leagues of football, so that's pretty serious stuff, especially when you're playing at a major university like Alabama. Yeah, then he tried to play some Canadian football, so this guy is coming in pretty good shape, especially with strength and conditioning. When you add in actually learning a martial arts to a guy that's already super athletic, he's already shown that he already has a lot of skill, and he's been doing this, I think they said, like less than 3 years, and he's beating a guy who's a very accomplished fighter and a guy who's been around the block a number of times, and Rafael Natal is awfully impressive, and he's definitely a guy I would look out for. Again, the middleweight division, not super deep, but definitely heavy at the top, but he's a guy that I think definitely has a bright future. I think that's for sure, and I really enjoyed watching him last Saturday. Elizeu Zaliki dos Santos, or EZDS, as I like to call him, EZDS, against Lyman Good. Heck of a fight. Definitely fight of the night. This was incredible. Both guys going at it. What I'm surprised at in this fight isn't so much the fact that EZDS won. I think you can definitely make a case that second round was super close, and I think he did win the third round. I thought Lyman Good had won that first round pretty easily, in my opinion. I probably would have gave it 29-28 Lyman Good, which is how one of the judges did score this fight. However, the other two scored it 30-27 in favor of EDS, and I didn't see that. I didn't see him winning all 3 rounds. I thought this fight was too close to give one guy every single round, especially when I didn't think there was a chance he won that first round. And I think most people would agree with me that he didn't win that first round. Lyman Good had that takedown, had a lot of control, landed some solid shots. Not to say Dos Santos didn't have any offense. I mean, he did land 23 strikes, only 7 less than Good. But that takedown control that Good had for a good chunk of that round, to me, gave the New York native that round. Round 2, a little more open. You know, Lyman Good did outstrike him 34-27 and land strikes. EDS was 0-3 on his takedowns, but EDS landed some very strong power shots, and I thought took over control of the second half of that round. And round 3 definitely was EDS. He proved that he was a little more fresher. He was throwing more. Proved by the strikes, he was 34 of 90 in terms of landed, and then the higher number, the thrown, just 25 of 63 for Good. So he was throwing more and landed 9 more strikes than Lyman Good. So I thought he had won that third round. Overall, Good slightly outstruck EDS, 89-84. Both only had 1 takedown. However, Good was 1-1, that 1 takedown he landed in the first round, and the only takedown successful for EDS was in the first round as well. So that was another thing I coupled in too, was the ability to stop the takedown for Lyman Good, and that's why I would have gave Good the fight 29-28. So a tad surprised that the judges scored 2 30-27s for EDS, and it doesn't take away from it being a great fight. And I'm not trying to take away the victory, but I do think it was scored relatively incorrectly, and I think that started a string of controversial scoring, starting with that fight, heading in to the main card here for UFC on Fox 25. As that kicked off, that was in the bantamweight division with Jimmy Rivera and Thomas Almeida, and this was a very good fight, not quite as good as Lyman Good, but the biggest thing in this fight was it took a while for Almeida to kind of get the range and get the speed of Rivera, which is interesting considering Rivera was the much taller and longer fighter. But Rivera, being one of the smaller bantamweights, especially for a guy that's in the top 5 like Rivera, only at 5'4", definitely moves with the speed of a flyweight. And I think that definitely threw Almeida off. And even though Almeida is credited with outstriking the New Jersey native 28-22, I would say that Rivera definitely landed the bigger shots of the 2 in that first round and would have gave Jimmy that round. Second round, Rivera tried a couple of takedowns, did have some time on top, I think, through a scramble. Ended up striking Almeida 26-19. That round was close, but I think that's when Almeida started to figure things out. And again, even though he got struck in that round, I think he was starting to land the bigger shots of the 2, landed some nice leg kicks in there, and I think probably won that second round. Round 3, I think Rivera sensed that the tides were starting to turn a little bit. Almeida was starting to figure out him on the feet, and Rivera, even though was doing well in the striking, realized that this is Almeida's game. The longer I stay saying he could catch something and knock me out, it's maybe a little less likely that I do that, considering I only have 4 knockouts of 21 fights. So Rivera really pushed hard for the wrestling. Took him down 2 times out of 3 attempts, slightly outstruck him 27-25. Almeida tried hard at the end, but I think those takedowns a little hard to overcome. And I thought that was a pretty easy 29-28 for Rivera. And for Rivera, this was a good fight. He obviously took on a heavy hitter in the division, was able to control range well, and was able to get takedowns when he needed them. Those were clutch takedowns there in the third round. He gets the victory, calls out Dominick Cruz. I think that's the fight to make. Cruz on the broadcast kind of was saying, he's going to have to beat some people before he beats me. But honestly, Dom, in my opinion, you got to take a fight before you fight the winner of TJ and Cody, because I know you beat TJ, but you did lose to Cody, and you did lose relatively soundly. And I know you're the former champion and all this and that, but they're not going to fight for another couple months. You're telling me that you're not going to fight at all in 2017? You're a dude that had like a 4-year layoff. You would think he'd be chomping at the bit to get back in there in the cage. Now, I don't know if he's worried about getting injury again in a training camp, but him taking on either Jimmy Rivera or Rafael Sunciao, I think would be a fight to make to set up a number 1 contender. It's got to be 2 of those 3 guys. Now, whoever's left out of that picture, which to me may be a Sunciao, just because his last couple fights I haven't been that excited with, the win over Sterling and the win over Marlon Moraes, that may face Asunciao to fight somebody else. I don't know who that would be, but I think that may be the case, and we may see then Rivera against Dom. But I don't think Dom should just automatically get the next title shot, the winner, Koji, because it's too long now. If that fight would have went down 3 weeks ago, we can set up what's now going to be TJ Cody in the fall. Okay, fine, give it to Cruz. But now that fight's not going to happen till early 2018 by all accounts. So I'd like to see Dom get back in there. I mean, he is coming off a loss. Let's not forget. And I don't think he should just get in there after a loss just because he used to be the champion. I think the UFC did him a lot of favors holding out as long as they did, giving him that fight right off the injury instead of another tune-up fight. So I think the UFC's done a lot and been very patient with him. So I think in this case, he should have to take another fight. And whether it's Rivera or Asunciao, I think he should fight one of them to earn his number one contender spot. For Almeida, obviously, he's gonna have. He kind of sat back a little bit. He'll have to learn to use his reach a little more against a shorter, faster guy, and that's really the only thing there. I thought he tried to do better in the second, third round. Did takedowns kind of hung him up, and that's obviously takedown defense he'll have to work on to keep the fight standing where he wants to. But just minor adjustments for Almeida. I thought this was a solid performance against the top guy. Just he fell up a little bit short. Next fight of the evening, Patrick Cummins against Gian Villante. This one definitely was a little controversial. It was a split decision. I do agree with the decision. Patrick Cummins did outstrike Villante 92-85. Slightly less active, 188 thrown to 210 for Villante. And Cummins only successful on 1 of 11 takedowns. Completely shut down Villante did Cummins. And I know that was a huge part of this fight. Villante, to me, definitely won the first round. I think that's no question there. He really rocked him early. There was a headbutt. He was kind of bloody looking. Outstruck him 35-20. No question there. Second round, Cummins started to recover a little bit. He just kind of, even though the takedowns were stopping, Villante was having to worry about those takedowns, maybe not throwing with as much there. And Cummins did a good job of just kind of being active, just pumping strikes. Outstruck him 38-24. Round 3, super close as well, but again, Villante had a very strong open to the round, and then Cummins finished very strong, and he ended up outstriking him 34-26. That round 3, very difficult to score because Villante, he did rock him. He hurt him early on in that round, but then Cummins started to come on, and I thought may have stole that round, and that's the case. And that's what happens. This was a close fight. Both guys landed bombs. I know people are like, oh, yeah, but Cummins looked late and stuff. That's because of a headbutt. If he wouldn't have taken that headbutt, his face wouldn't have looked as bad. I think that's a fact. Yeah, Villante looked a little better, but that's not who wins the fight. Cummins was the guy moving forward. He was pushing the pace, not only with his striking, trying for the takedowns. Obviously, he wasn't successful, and I give credit, and that's definitely points for him for stopping the takedown. But striking numbers were even, relatively, and both landed some hard shots. That's what happens when you leave it in the hands of the judges. And once again, Villante is not able to kind of get that kill early, and he suffers. Look at his last fight against, well, I guess it'd be 2 fights ago, against Shogun. He kind of lets guys back into fights. He kind of lets them off the hook, strings them along, and he gets tired a little bit. I mean, they said that before this fight that he was bigger than Stipe Miocic and cut to 205. Well, that's the case. Then don't fight at light heavyweight anymore. If you're the same size as the current heavyweight champion of the UFC, I think that should tell you something. I really do. Is that why he gets tired so much? Because he's cutting all that weight? If so, just move up to heavyweight. I think that may have to be the case. Maybe that'll allow him to kind of throw more with the band and not worried about pacing himself and weight cut. Because if you're the same physical presence as a guy who's wrecking fools right now in heavyweight in Stipe Miocic, then that's what I would do. I think that's the move for Gian Villante, because his last couple fights, he's kind of been underwhelming, and he's not getting any younger. Weight cuts are going to get harder as the years go on, and so I think if he wants to stick around, because he is an exciting fighter, he's a nice guy. I've interviewed him a couple times here on the program, so to stick around, I think he's going to have to seriously look at it, because his last 3 fights, I mean, think about it. He should have beat Shogun, let Shogun back in the fight, gets knocked out. He beats a dude and took a lot of unnecessary shots against a dude who was a natural middleweight on like a week's notice, and then, has a good first round and then kind of coast a little bit against Patrick Cummins and ends up losing a close split decision. I think he's going to have to seriously look into that because he's upset, but at the end of the day, he kind of only has himself to blame because he really left that third round. He didn't put a stamp on that third round. He put the stamp on the first, and then the second two probably lost him. And that's what happens. He can complain and moan and hear the boos from the New York crowd saying he should have won, but at the end of the day, he didn't finish that third round, and it doesn't surprise me that he didn't get the finish the decision from the judges. Co-main event of the evening: Darren Elkins against Dennis Bermudez. Now, speaking of, if you talk about questionable judging, we get to this fight here, which I think was the most. I'm going to be honest. I don't see this fight for Darren Elkins at all. You look at the numbers, he outstruck Bermudez 30-19, did take him down twice, but I thought Bermudez clearly lands some power shots. I would have gave him that round. Second round, maybe a little more even, outstruck Elkins, did 36-27, did land a takedown, but so did Bermudez again. I thought Bermudez was piecing him up on the feet. In round 3, definitely all Bermudez. Outstruck him 55-33, shut him down in the takedowns. I think he definitely won that round. I thought this was going to be easy 30-27 for Dennis Bermudez, or at the very least a 29-28, because I think that first round Elkins did have some good controlling factors. So I thought this was going to be a win for Bermudez, and here the judges score it, 29-28 twice for Darren Elkins. I was really surprised. Coming into this fight, if Bermudez could stop the takedown, he could win this fight, and I thought he did that. 3 of 10 takedowns for Darren Elkins. And Elkins, to me, landed no significant shots, didn't have Bermudez in any sort of trouble with submissions. I just didn't see anything that he was doing that came close to him finishing that fight. Whereas I don't think you could say that for Bermudez. I think Bermudez actually landed some power shots, and I thought was closer to finishing the fight, even though he never got in serious threat of finishing it. He definitely was trying more, landing more power shots, and that's what happens when it's in the judges, as much as I hate to say that, but I thought Dennis Bermudez did enough to win that fight. I'm a little shocked by that. And, that could be, it was a little bit, the biggest X factor was there were a couple times Bermudez did engage in takedowns and did engage in grappling exchanges with Elkins, which made no sense because that was the only way he can do anything to you was in grappling exchanges. And a couple times he forced that. And I think that was kind of an instinct thing because most guys, he can do that and be the better wrestler. But in this case, probably not. Elkins is maybe at the same level, maybe a little better, but he's a lot bigger in those exchanges. So Bermudez can't really bully him around like he can other guys in this division. And his corner told him just kind of stay away from him, and he didn't. And I think those couple instances in those first 2 rounds where he kind of was like, I'm going to test out and prove my wrestling, that's great. But at the end of the day, I think it could have cost you a victory. And I think if he looks back at the tape and sees those instances that he actually initiated takedowns, maybe we'll realize maybe I shouldn't have done that. I should have just stepped back, kept circling, met this guy come to me, and counter strikes and moving it out. And I think he'll realize that. Now, that still doesn't argue that I thought the judges kind of messed up on this decision, but as far as moving forward, I think Bermudez can take a lot away from this fight. And for Darren Elkins, you get the victory, but you got to work on your stand-up, homie, because, yeah, you just got by Dennis Bermudez, but if you want to fight the elite in this division, you're going to have to be able to learn how to fight at distance because there are guys much like Bermudez that will be able to stuff your takedowns, and if you have nothing to back it up, you're going to get hurt very seriously. The damage will be on you, not on your opponent. Getting to the main event of the evening, Chris Weidman, Kelvin Gastelum, pretty much what I expected. Weidman was able to dictate the pace of this fight with his wrestling and takedowns, and obviously he's the much bigger guy. And Gastelum, looked good. I knew he was going to be the faster guy. He moved in and out relatively well, but that was going to be the difference, was the size. Could he stop the takedowns enough to keep it standing, to dart in and out and land power shots like he did with that straight right towards the end of the first? And, yeah, he was super close to ending that in the first. No doubt about it. But he didn't finish it. Weidman was able to recover, take the fight back to the ground, and eventually in that third round work for a submission. And that's really going to be the biggest negative for Gastelum up at 85 is the size factor. I mean, he's 5'9", Chris Weidman's 6'3". He's just a much bigger dude. And as much as, yeah, he has better conditioning, isn't the Warrior Cup weight, and that's all great. And it is definitely a plus for him. But giving up that size, that wears on you when you're constantly the smaller guy against a big, strong grappler like that. And that's the con of being a smaller guy in the weight class. There's positives and negatives to everything, and that's one of the negatives. And he almost outdid it. He almost didn't make it a negative with his hand speed, which he's going to have the fastest hand speeds in this division, but he just wasn't quite. He just kind of ran out of time there and wasn't able to get that back to land that shot. I still think he should stay at 185 because even though, yeah, he got submitted in the third round against Chris Weidman, he's super fast, and these middleweights definitely cannot keep up with that. The con, again, of being the smaller guy, that's something he's going to have to deal with and try to strategize around because that's what guys are going to do to him in this division. He's going to try to take him down, and bully him. And didn't work out for him in this fight. It worked out in previous outings. I still think he is better suited for this division just because I just don't think he can make that weight. He has a really wide frame, even though he's short. And I just think you put your body through a lot of unnecessary things. And again, if he's having trouble making weight now in his early 20s, how's he going to make weight when he starts to get into his 30s? That's when weight cutting gets harder. It doesn't get easier with age. So if he can't do it now in the prime of his life, how's he going to do, in 5-6 years? He's going to have to move back up the middleweight anyway. So to me, learn now when you're young, when you're able to, put on that muscle and get strong and learn with the weight class and work it that way. Plus, 170 is just it's just a monster of a division, and it's routinely the UFC's toughest division. Middleweight really hasn't been that case. We've had quite a change at the top since Anderson Silva has no longer been the champion. I mean, we went from Weidman to Rockhold, now to Bisping, and obviously the interim with Whitaker. We've had more champions in the last 3 years than like the previous 8. So it's definitely a division that is now a little more open than it had been in years past, and I think that's huge for a young guy like Kelvin Gastelum, who by proxy of sticking around can end up getting a title shot. And I think this was a big learning experience because this was, I think, by far the best guy he's ever faced in his career. He fell up a little bit short. There were some successes in there, but definitely a learning experience. And obviously for Weidman, he finally gets back on the winning track. It's big for this division because, again, he's big in the New York market, again, where they want to make money. And they probably did, again, make a lot of money on that live gate. So that's good for the UFC in that respect. But as far as ratings, obviously proved that, if he's not fighting Anderson Silva, maybe not as big a draw as he once had been. Let's get to UFC 214 this weekend. Going to preview the main card. Real quickly, I want to let people know I interviewed Drew Dober and Jared Brooks. They are both fighting. They're on the Fight Pass portion of this card. And I did interviews with them. Go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/BeyondTheCagePodcast. Check out those interviews with Drew and Jared. They're on the same episode if you search that. And they talked about Jared Brooks. He's making his UFC debut at flyweight against former Ultimate Fighter contestant Eric Shelton. And Drew Dober is taking on Josh Berkman in lightweight. Those are the first two fights of the night, and you can check out those interviews as well. Also, a lot of people are going to be treating this one, maybe not so much for the fighting skill, but for the looks, as Kaylin Curran against Alexandra Albu. A lot of eyeballs, I think, are going to be in that, and that's why the highlight fight there in the prelim and for Facebook, and that's why they're promoting that one. And it's not to say those ladies aren't skilled, but I think a lot of people are going to have eyeballs on that fight for other reasons than fighting skills, and I definitely can see why the UFC is promoting that fight as such as the highlight fight. The main card on, I think it's technically on FXX this time, so definitely check your programming guides. Got some good fights. Calvin Kattar against Andre Fili. Always excited to see Andre Fili. Super excited to see this kid back. Definitely a guy I love to watch, and that's T-City, Brian Ortega. He's taking on Renato Maciano in the featherweight division, so we get to see some featherweight prospects here. Super excited for that. I love to see T-City's been out for a while, been injured, so super excited to see that. Also, we got Aljamain Sterling against Renan Barão. On the UFC website, or Fight Metric, I guess, it says it's a catchweight, so I guess this is not officially a bantamweight bout. I think Barão's inching back in this division, but this is a huge fight for both gentlemen. Barão trying to maybe reinsert himself in the division he once ruled, and Aljamain Sterling's still looking for that signature victory, after falling short to top guys like Brian Caraway and Rafael Sunciao. So getting a win over Renan Barão would do a lot for the young New York native. And then the main event of the prelims, huge matchup in the featherweight division, definitely has some title implications, I think, in this one. You got Ricardo Lamas, who's fought for a championship before. He's taking on a guy who's just shot up, not only in popularity, but I think in skill, and that's Jason Knight. This kid is just down to brawl. He obviously, talking of Alan Belcher, he's trained with them. Kind of a lot of people are likening him to a mini Diaz brother, a guy that just likes to scrap. He has a good submission game and just loves to fight. And it's hard not to like this kid from Mississippi. And Jason Knight taking on Ricardo Lamas, a guy that's a very strong wrestler, has some good submissions and some power as well. Definitely a contrasting of styles, and definitely a chance to see whether Jason Knight is ready to make that leap up to the elite, or if Lamas to prove that he still belongs, in the top 5 of this division. So super excited for that one on the undercard for UFC 214. Getting to this main card again, starting with the guy I talked to this week, Jimi Manuwa against Volkan Ozdemir. As he said in the interview, if you listened on earlier or you checked out the interview on the MMA Fighting Club Facebook page, he expects this fight to end in a knockout. He expects it to just be a striking war, and I think that's what it's going to be. The question is, who's going to be better prepared for that, and who's going to actually do it? I would give a slight edge to Jimi Manuwa. Reason I say that is because I think that he can take the hits a little better, and I think has a little more of a power. Yes, he did knock out Misha Cirkunov in less than a minute. Yes, he does have 10 of 14 victories by knockout. Not saying the dude doesn't have power, but maybe the MMA math doesn't work. But in this case, they both have a common opponent, that being OSP. Who knocked out OSP? Jimi Manuwa. Who didn't? Volkan Ozdemir. Was that a short notice fight? And against a guy in the top 10, nobody expected him to win? Yes, I will concede that. There were some factors into that fight for Volkan Ozdemir. At the same token, still didn't finish him. Jimi Manuwa did. Jimi Manuwa's been in big fights. He's been in main events. And he actually was initially going to be fighting Daniel Cormier on this card. So a little more of an edge to Manuwa. He's been in the UFC longer. He's fought in a little better competition over his career. Now, that's to say that Ozdemir can't come in here and knock him out in less than a minute. The fact that both are strikers, it's probably about a 60-40. I only give a slight edge to Manuwa. I think that Ozdemir is right up there. And if he wins, he makes a very strong case for fighting for the UFC championship. Alexander Gustafsson is there as well, obviously with his win over Glover Teixeira earlier this year, which of course would impact Jimi Manuwa. As he said in the interview, he's already fought Gustafsson once. Since then, they've become good friends and training partners, and he has no desire to rematch the Swede. So if Gustafsson, that's the only thing though, if Gustafsson's next, which again I think he should be on all accounts, that leaves the winner of this fight kind of in a weird situation. I believe they're ranked 4 and 5 respectively, or something like that. I think the only other guy, I'm trying to think of the only other guy up there. Not I guess might be Glover. I'm not sure, but kind of puts him in an odd spot because Manuwa said he wouldn't fight Gustafsson. So if Gustafsson goes ahead, gets the title shot, and let's say he beats whoever comes out of Jones or Cormier, is Manuwa then moving up to heavyweight, or is he just kind of chilling around? It definitely presents itself a very interesting situation because they said Manuwa was going to get a title shot here. So if Manuwa wins, you can make a case, well, the UFC said they were going to give him a title shot. They should be good on it. But I think Alexander Gustafsson has done more recently to get a title shot than Jimmy Manuwa was, even if Manuwa is successful here at UFC 214. I don't know. We'll see, but this is an excellent fight. Going to be a lot of action. Great fight to kick off the card. Super excited for it, and definitely the winner puts himself in a very good spot to potentially get a shot at the title later this year. Next fight of the evening, welterweight showdown. Former welterweight champion Robbie Lawler taking on former WEC champ Donald Cerrone. Cerrone, since moving up to welterweight, has looked really good. Just has that one loss at welterweight, which was coming in his last fight against Jorge Masvidal. That snapped a streak of 4 consecutive victories at welterweight, with 4 finishes coming over the likes of Alex Oliveira. Look how big that victory looks now. At the time, it didn't look that big, but now that looks super big. Knocking out Patrick Cote, Rick Story, and Matt Brown. Of course, kind of got caught off guard. A lot of people thought that was going to be his shot for the title if he was able to defeat Masvidal. Came up a little bit short. Now taking on Robbie Lawler. Man, he's taking on such a monster here. The biggest difference is going to be the hand speed of Donald Cerrone and his kicks. If he can implement those leg kicks, start low early with his boxing, moving in and out, using that hand speed, then go up high in the second, third round, he can maybe get a finish. The difference is just that warrior mentality that Robbie Lawler has to just bite down on his mouthpiece and swing hard and land something crazy. I mean, look at his fight. Donald Cerrone has a lot of probably... what's the word I'm looking for? Study of Lawler. Obviously, he's trained and is friends with Carlos Condit for many years down there in Albuquerque at Jackson's gym. Obviously, Condit had a huge war with Robbie Lawler. So he kind of already saw that style there, the contrast of the punches and bunches versus the hard style. And obviously, this has been a couple years removed now. Lawler's taken a lot of shots in the case. You look at his wars with Hendricks, obviously his war with Carlos Condit as well as Rory McDonald. Definitely a guy that has taken a lot of hits, and that's one of the reasons why he's taken some time off after his knockout loss to Tyron Woodley. This will be his first fight in about a year since losing his championship. So how will Robbie look? Is it going to be new, invigorated Lawler, or is it a guy that is now towards the downside of his career? This is a big turning point fight for Robbie Lawler to prove if he's still an elite contender. And for Donald Cerrone, it's a chance to try to get one back. And if he can get a victory, he puts himself in a very good position with a win over a former champion to put himself back into that title talk that he had before that fight against Jorge Masvidal. Again, the key is going to be, can Lawler sustain the speed and output of Donald Cerrone to land one of those big haymakers? And can Cerrone stay away from him long enough in that 15 minutes to either get a finish or not get hit by a big haymaker to be successful? Getting to the first of 3 consecutive title fights on UFC 214, starting first with the Women's Featherweight Championship. The winner takes the title as Chris Cyborg, former Invicta and Strikeforce World Champion, against former Invicta Bantamweight Champion Tanya Evinger. Of course, the Women's Featherweight Champion is vacant after champion Jermaine Durandamy defeating Holly Holm at UFC 208. Just flat out said she didn't want to fight Chris Cyborg. Thought that she was a cheater and had no interest in fighting her. So the UFC said, well, that's who we want you to fight. If you don't want to defend your title, we're going to take it away from you. And that's what they did. They took away from the title. Durandamy has now moved back down to bantamweight where she was, and now I guess is going to try to win the bantamweight. It's going to be kind of a forgotten first title fight. I think for a lot of people, UFC is kind of almost rewriting their own history by saying, "Oh, that was like a test run in the featherweight division. We wanted Cyborg to fight in that fight all along, and here we go. We get it." Tanya Evinger comments before the fight saying, "I don't care what she's done in the past, if she's failed tests or if she's used before, but she's not failing her test now, so let's fight." And that's the attitude I like to see in someone, because that's the truth. She's not failing her test now, and they're testing these athletes more than they ever have in the past. So, if she is still taking something and ducking these tests, then I hate to say, I guess it's not cheating if you're not trying, the old adage from pro wrestling, but it's kind of true. If she could somehow navigate past these, you got to give her some credit. As much as I don't want these athletes to be doing that, but it's definitely harder now. So if she could somehow pull that off, then I guess some credit to her. I mean, she shouldn't be doing that, but again, impressive if she can. However, she hasn't been failing the test now. Tanya Evinger is ready for it. And Evinger's a tough girl. She's down to fight. Obviously, she's going to be giving up some size. Most girls are to Cyborg. I see this one not going as quick as people think. I think Evinger will be able to take a few punches, but I think overall the size and the power is going to wear on Tanya, and I think that she'll probably move back down to bantamweight, where I think she can have some success in this division. She was starting to get in pretty wrecking girls a lot in Invicta, so I think she's very deserving of a chance to fight with the Ultimate Fighting Championship, and here's her chance. Maybe she can prove me wrong. Maybe she can last the storm, but so far nobody really has, so it's hard for me to really pick against it. So maybe that's giving my pick away. I'm excited. Evinger has the right attitude, and I'm hoping for a good fight, and I think it will be. Co-main event of the evening, Tyron Woodley against Demian Maia. This one could be the snoozer on the card. Woodley, other than knocking out Robbie Lawler during his so far championship tenure, and really a few fights before that, has looked tentative at times. You could tell his footwork, again, is still his biggest flaw in his game. That showed in both fights against Stephen Thompson. The second one especially, where, again, I did thought he lost that fight. I could see probably could have won the first one, definitely landed more damage in this than the second one. However, both fights were not great. He's now taking on a guy who's can be boring in Demian Maia. You look at his last fight, he had trouble taking down Jorge Masvidal, and Masvidal is not a natural wrestler. You look at Woodley and he's going to be obviously a little bigger and stronger than Jorge. So if it stays standing, you got to give the edge to Tyron Woodley. Maia makes no mistake about wanting to strike with anybody, and the power advantage certainly is with the Missouri native in Tyron Woodley. So if Maia can't get a favorable position on the ground, this is going to be a very difficult fight for him to win. However, if he can get to the back of Woodley, I think Woodley may be successful for a takedown. Now, it's hard to see because Woodley hasn't fought too many jiu-jitsu guys like this, so it's really hard to say and pinpoint a point in his career where I was like, well, remember when he took on this guy? Yeah, you can't really say that. It's hard. It's really hard to say. I think Maia, yeah, I can see why he won his last fight, and I do agree with it, but the one time I guess he fought a jiu-jitsu guy would have been going back to his fight in Strikeforce. Actually, no, it would have been his second UFC fight. He lost a close split decision to Jake Shields, and that's about as close as it gets to Demian Maia. If you go back and watch when those two actually fought each other in the main event down in Brazil. That was a couple years ago. That was about 4 years ago. It was a close fight. And again, that was a 3-round fight. This is a 5-round. A little different. Maia does have some problems with conditioning, so it's going to be interesting. It's really going to be, can Maia get this fight in close, make it a grappling war, and can Woodley disengage and be able to land bombs? Plain and simple, but it does have a chance to be a snoozer, especially if Maia can't get the submission and Woodley can't keep him off of him. It could end up being a snoozer. Main event. Daniel Cormier, Jon Jones, the second time around. For these two first fought, I believe it was UFC 181. That was back in January of 2015. Since that point in time, Jon Jones has only fought once. That was well over a year ago when he did look a little bit rusty against Ovince St. Preux. Jon's now 30 years old. He's only fought once in the last 2.5 years. And he's facing on a guy that obviously is very motivated for this rematch. A fight that pretty much makes his career and legacy. A fight that he could very easily, in my opinion, just retire afterwards. He's had huge success since losing to Jones, winning 4 consecutive fights, submitting Rumble Johnson twice, having a heck of a war against Alexander Gustafsson, and also, did beat Anderson Silva. That wasn't great of a performance. He still went in there and got the job done. Jones, from all accounts, does look a little bigger. Obviously, he's older now, too, so his frame's starting to fill out a little more. Maybe he's adding some more power to that frame. And I think the biggest thing in this fight is mindset. Jon has proven He's had some mental lapses outside the cage that have obviously hurt his career in the last couple of years, including being stripped of his championship and I guess interim championship, I guess 2 championships. And Cormier, again, he's going to be a little shorter. He's a little older. He's a little slower. Maybe he has a little more power, but the way that first fight went, the fact that that fight was played in close where you think Cormier would have the advantage and Jones was still able to go in there and outdo Cormier up close is a huge eye-opener, because if it would have played out more at range, you got to think Cormier doesn't stand a chance. So, man, that's the big aspect, is just, will Jones still be able to dominate in close? Because if he can do that again, then when the fight's at range, he clearly has the advantage. He has the longest reach like ever. And he's 6'4". He's 5 inches taller. He has like a 10-inch more reach. If he actually does play the strategy the correct way, it's going to be very hard for Cormier to cover that distance to move inside, being, a little bit heavier and being a little bit slower. And it's just, Cormier, if he was 30 and Jon Jones was 30, I think this is a lot closer of a matchup. But by the time these two kind of have met in their careers, and that's just something that can't be helped, that's just how it works, it's just going to be very tough to beat Jon Jones. However, I think Cormier does have a little bit of window in that first round. Because Jones is coming off a little bit of a layoff, I think if he can really explode in that opening 5 minutes, I think maybe he can catch Jones trying to settle into this fight. And I really think the first round is going to set the tone for this fight. I think if DC cannot do much in that first round, it's going to be hard for him to come back as this fight goes into the later rounds. I think that's just a fact. At 205, the way he likes to fight, he's not built for that pace for 25 minutes. So I think that first round is going to be really key for DC. He has to at least hurt or wound Jon Jones in that opening 5 minutes to me to believe that he can win that fight. And if he can't, I think we're going to see another victory and another title run here for Jon Bones Jones. However, still going to go to picks. First fight of the evening, 205 pounds, Ozdemir against Manuwa. I'm going to go Jimmy Manuwa. Just like his experience, and I think is a little bit a heavier hitter, a little bit of a longer guy, so I'm going to go with the Englishman to win that fight. Robbie Lawler against Donald Cerrone. Going to go Donald Cerrone. I think his speed and output are what's going to undo Robbie Lawler, and I'm not sure what Robbie Lawler we're going to see. It's been a while since we've seen him. Not sure if he's going to be able to take the hits as well as he once did, so I'm going to go with the punches and bunches and the hand speed of the Cowboy Donald Cerrone. Tanya Everger against Chris Cyborg. Got to go Chris Cyborg. She hasn't really lost yet. Her only technical loss in her career was her very first fight in 2005. So I'm going to have the role continue to go on here for the Brazilian and capture the UFC Featherweight Championship. So I'm going to go with Chris Cyborg. Tyron Woodley against Damian Maia. Going to go Tyron Woodley. I think his power and finishing ability is a huge X factor in this fight. I think he's going to be able to uncork something. Maia, is a guy that I don't think takes big shots very well, and I think Woodley eventually will be able to land one of those bombs in the course of a 25-minute fight and end the night of the Brazilian to remain the UFC welterweight champion. Main event of the evening, Jon Bones Jones against Daniel Cormier. I definitely will be pulling for Cormier. I'll say when he first kind of came into the UFC and Strikeforce, I wasn't a huge fan of him, but him as a commentator has kind of won me over a little bit. And Jon Jones, I will admit, Jon Jones is finally kind of playing himself up as a villain, something he needed to do, and just try not to be fake. So I will say, I think Jones is kind of growing into that role as a little bit of villain. I like it. I like Jones with an edge a little bit. I think it's something he should have tried to done years ago. So I liked how he's coming into this fight, but as much as I want to pick Daniel Cormier, I got to go with Jon Jones. Just his physical tools, I think, are going to be a lot for Cormier to overcome. So I'm going to go with Jones to once again become the light heavyweight champion of the UFC. Thanks again for everybody for watching live on MMA Fighting Club, and of course watching after the fact on my YouTube channel for Beyond the Cage, youtube.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. Follow me on Twitter at Jim Graham. I'm also on Instagram at the Jim Graham. I'd like to thank MMA Fighting Club for hosting the live stream. Also like to thank my partners at MMA UK, TheMMACommunity.com, Gorilla the Bear, MMAsignatures.co, MMA Fight Fans on Twitter, Flying Brian J, as well as Izzy Garcia for supporting Beyond the Cage each. Oh, and Top Rated MMA as well for supporting Beyond the Cage each and every week. So until next week, thank you again for listening to another edition of Beyond the Cage.